We've heard it all before, haven't we? That this Labour Party know how to solve the problem. Stop the boat, said the Conservative Party. Smash the gang, said Sir Keir Starmer. Well, every single thing he has suggested doing has turned out to be a bit of a false promise, hasn't it? Have those gangs been smashed? No. Has everyone been deported? No. Oh, they might brag that they've deported thousands of people, but that's a drop in the ocean compared to the number of people who are still sitting there on wait lists waiting for their asylum applications to be processed. They said they were going to shut down the migrant hotels, where they might be shutting down some. But the solution to that problem, I think, is even worse, which is putting people into private housing in and around the country and planting them into neighbourhoods without any form of checking what they're doing, how they're going about their business, whether they're coming or going. A report out just the other day showed that 40% of workers at Deliveroo could well be people working illegally. I mean, this is just, it goes on and on and on. And every time he comes up with some sort of solution, it falls apart within a matter of moments. Let's remind ourselves, first of all, of what happened when he said, I know, I've got a great idea. I've nicked it off Georgia Maloney. We're going to send people awaiting being processed to somewhere like Albania. And he actually went to do a big old press conference with Edi Rama, the Albanian Prime Minister. This is what happened.
Yes, we are in talks with a number of countries about return hubs. And I see them as a really important innovation. And that is consistent with the work that we've done in relation to UK-Albania reduction in numbers.
I have been very clear since day one when we started this process with Italy that this was a one-off with Italy.
You're literally doing a press conference with the guy and you've not even sorted out a deal with him personally. What a load of ineptitude. Well, apparently he's about to face humiliation again because he came out of another flagship policy, a one-in, one-out migrant deal with France, which he thinks that the Prime Minister was going to have this summit with France. It's happening this week. Oh, that's it. Little Emmanuel Macron, Petit Napoleon, is coming to town. He's going to have the full royal carriage ride. The Mall is festooned with the tricolour. And the Prime Minister was going to use all of this sort of, you know, cozying up and pomp and ceremony to persuade Macron to sign up to a deal where we will send one person who's come from the Channel illegally to France in return for taking somebody who has legally applied from France to come to the UK. FYI, if you can't add up, Sir Keir Starmer, one in, one out means sort of a net zero change with the level of people coming to this country. I hope you realise that. It's not actually going to bring the numbers down, is it, Sunshine? Well, don't you worry, because it seems to me that that is not going to happen. Anyway, Whitehall sources have now played down the prospect of a breakthrough this week, following an intervention by the European Commission. Even Macron himself had said repeatedly, you can't do a deal with France alone, you can only do a deal with the whole of the EU. Let's remember that this is the man who wanted to become basically the president of the EU. Then when the UK left the EU, he wanted to set up a sort of little separate EU with certain countries that Britain could be a part of. He's the pin-up of the EU, is our little mate, Emmanuel. So this idea that you could sort of, you know, circumvent the dealings of Brussels and go straight to the source of the problem was for the birds all along. Let's speak to Dr. Mike Jones, political commentator, scientist and migration expert. I mean, I just think this is a stupid idea anyway. This one in, one out. Someone who's crossed the Channel legally gets sent to France and then, you know, instead we'll have application centres in France itself where they can come over legally. Why would the French agree to that? I don't understand what's in it for France.
There's very little in it for France themselves because it creates massive political problems for them, particularly with the Prime Minister and his rather precarious political situation at the moment. I think Macron is trying to reach out to Keir Starmer. Obviously, Starmer is very much aligned with the EU project, and I think Macron is showing a certain amount of solidarity, but there's very little in this for France itself. I think the French may be trying to have their cake and eat it. They'll want to offload some of their illegal migrants to the UK themselves and possibly return the illegal migrants that they receive to the sort of landing countries such as, Italy or Greece. So, and that's obviously why there's massive tension within the European Commission at this point in time.
I mean, I think it was it the sort of mayor of Calais, or actually, no, it might have been one of the ministers in Macron's cabinet, basically pointed the finger at Britain, saying, the problem is with you guys, you're El Dorado for migrants. You give them a house, you give them a hotel. They're sitting in Calais going, we want to go over to Britain because we get 4-star accommodation, we get a free phone, we get football tickets, driving lessons, pocket money, all-inclusive accommodation. And you have to agree with him, because in Calais they're not getting all that stuff. They're in temporary encampments. And so there is this pull factor which weighs heavily on France, because as long as they think they might be able to get a boat over to Calais, they're going to traipse through Europe and end up in Calais. So it would be in the French interest, one would think, to start scuppering the passage of migrants across the Channel at the very least, in the hope that actually it might stop the exodus throughout Europe to land on the French coastline. And yet what we find out is the scale of the French cops' ineptitude has been laid bare. Nearly 4 times more migrants have come to the UK than they've managed to stop. What's going on here? Is this just the scale of the problem is so big that with all the will in the world, the gendarmerie and the police in France can do very little to prevent it, especially when the French unions are saying don't get their loafers wet, don't let them walk into the shallows of the water, although I understand that that is now potentially being reversed? Or is it that there's a sort of laissez-faire attitude, a sort of it suits us a little bit not to stop this problem?
Scale is definitely a problem there. You're spot on about that, Alex. The second problem, though, is that the French don't want to be a holding a pen for illegal migrants who don't want to be in France but want to make their way to the UK, because that will create a massive political difficulties within France itself. I mean, to be fair, the French are changing their maritime laws. They've sort of trialled this sort of small boat puncture scheme, although the French have bizarrely said that this is a one-off incident. It's not going to be sort of standard operational procedure.
What? Why?
Yeah. I know that's really concerning. I thought this was part of a new sort of operational strategy, but the French may not actually puncture these dinghies as a sort of first course of action, and I think that's really, really concerning. If they do puncture them, I think that's a bit of a game changer, personally. But the French may not actually go down that line. I saw a quote in the Daily Mail on this, and they said they only punctured them because they were concerned about the sort of motorization of the vehicle itself, and it wasn't functioning properly. Very, very bizarre.
To me, this is bizarre, because, look, I'm not a genius, I'm not a migration expert, I don't fully understand how all of this works. But what is clear to me, we've got pictures on the screen at the moment of scenes that I assume are near the dunes of Calais. I actually, last year I was in France, and I went over by ferry, and I went back by ferry, and I actually took a wrong turning and ended up driving my car around Calais, and was absolutely aghast at what I saw there. I mean, the number of migrants all waiting to try and get over to Britain is breathtaking. And surely the greatest way to prevent that happening, prevent these people flocking into France and amassing along the French coastline, is to prove to them once and for all that they won't be able to get on a boat. So you'd imagine getting out the old scissors and stabbing a few of those dinghies is the best way of going about that.
Yeah, that's the logical way of viewing it. But the problem is politics doesn't function according to that logic. It's, the logic of politics is not in my term in office, NIMTO. And the long-term solution is basically to stop these people from arriving in the UK. That reduces the pull factor. Fewer illegal migrants move into France, concomitantly as a result of that. But democratic politics is focused around electoral cycles. So if France becomes a holding pen for illegal immigrants, then the Macron government is going to face huge problems from, the Front National and the centre-right parties, and it's going to create instability. So that's the problem here, and ultimately France is quite a nationalistic country. It's a member of the EU, which might sound a bit contradictory, but they're very patriotic and they're massive immigration skeptics. And, the French political elites, they want to cooperate with the UK, but they don't want to cooperate too much. So they don't want their actions to be too effective, if you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, as someone who's very, very familiar with France, indeed, I'd say that the state of France when it comes to immigration and the balkanisation of communities is actually worse in metropolitan France than it is in Britain, as hard as that may be to believe. And so I wonder whether sort of keeping that spigot slightly open and venting off a little bit of pressure across the channel might suit them, although I do think it's counterproductive. Now, you remember that guy who came over with a big old gun tattooed on his face? His name was Fayaz Khan, otherwise known as Afghan Pazer or something, some funny name. He had that Kalashnikov on his face and he threatened Marda Pacer. He provoked outrage last year when he put videos online of his trip over to the UK in a small boat. But before he did that, he was sitting there like a sort of gangster over in Calais, making videos like, bam, 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 I'm going to kill Nigel Farage and I'm going to come over to Britain. Let's, rather than me doing an impersonation, which is always going to be ridiculous, let's have a little watch of this geezer.
You not know me. I gonna come to England. I gonna mother. Pasa, man, there's mother pasa. Every country know me, Vamaya, mother pasa. I'm TikToker, I'm not gang, I'm not mafia. I'm mafia's papa, mother pasa, man. Rais Mamtana.
Well, he's a nice gentleman, isn't he? I'm sure we welcomed him with open arms because he's exactly the sort of nuclear scientist that so culturally enriches our society. Thankfully, though, we did welcome him with open arms and put him straight in the nick. But ridiculously, that little TikToker influencer with the Kalashnikov on his face is still broadcasting to his adoring fans on TikTok from HMP Wandsworth. What on earth is going on, Mike?
Well, he's just a scumbag. He's totally degenerate. Why is he even in prison? He should be deported straight away, 24, 48 hours. He should be sent back to his country of origin. He has a Kalashnikov tattooed on his face. He's issuing death threats. And he's posting these bizarre TikTok videos of himself in prison, banging his head against the door, feeding birds outside of his video, and, being all robust in terms of his threats to British politicians. It's just disgusting. And it shows the level of almost pathological altruism here in the UK, that we're prepared to harbour people that pose a direct and significant threat to national security in our prisons. He should be returned to his country of origin. If we don't have a returns agreement with that country, then why isn't the UK government using leverage, visa bans, international aid cuts?
It's a problem here, though. Look, I was going to ask you about this next. Can we actually return people to Afghanistan? Because that means signing up to some sort of agreement with the Taliban.
Yeah, that is unfortunately one avenue you would have to go down. I mean, to have a returns agreement with Afghanistan, you would have to give them a certain amount of diplomatic recognition. And, obviously that's quite an uncomfortable thing, because the way the Taliban treat women there is, pretty disgusting. But another option would be to have a third safe country agreement. Rwanda, for example.
Oh, it'd go down very well in Kigali, I'm sure. The likes of the Paul Kagame government are probably well looking forward to having him there. But look, I agree with you. I don't understand why, when these people come across who, like him, are clearly just, scumbags, to use your word, I fully endorse it. I don't understand why we're not like, right, go and do some hard labour. Why are we like, oh, yeah, sit in a prison cell, have a PlayStation, use your phone, carry on broadcasting on TikTok. Makes a mockery of the entire system.
Yeah, I mean, my view is they should be deported as soon as possible. We need to reopen detention centres. We've got one in Haslam, one in Campsfield House. Just reopen them. You've got a lot of capacity there that could be added instantly. You don't need any sort of ascension island. You don't need to build tent cities on British overseas territories. We've got actual facilities there that we can reopen, keep them locked in there, and start negotiating with foreign countries. You know, Donald Trump is doing this. He's got his own, you know, sort of blacklist. He's banning visas from countries that will not cooperate with him on illegal immigration. Use leverage, international aid, remittances. That's a huge one. That is the topic that isn't discussed by anyone in the media. We need taxes on remittances, maybe even sanctions, where we stop people transferring money back to their country of origin, because the reason they won't accept illegal immigration is because of the money that's sent back from the communities here to their country of origin. We need to start using leverage, Trump-style diplomacy techniques, total visa bans, which will annoy the middle class in their country, and cuts in international aid. You know, we need to get tough, but we're not being tough because we have a political class that's completely out of touch with reality and is living in the past. But that's the way it is.
Oh, we have a media as well, by and large, that beatify people like that horrible creature. Mike, thank you ever so much for coming on the show.